listen, I voted for Trump, and I'm very happy with that decision. And at the same time, if you can't admit that Trump is a cartoon character, you're just not being honest with yourself.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome. I'm here today with Juda Alcabes, who is a licensed clinical social worker. We've had some interactions online at different points and had some moments of agreement. And I thought there was a lot that we could potentially have a conversation about. So welcome, Juda.
Hi. Hello.
So I want to start out with kind of your educational background and your journey to get to the LCSW point. What inspired you to become a therapist?
I love that question because it's so complex. I think for everybody it's complex. I know for me, I can say that there are definitely two driving forces, which, one, I guess you could say, comes from the darkness and one comes from the light. As a kid, there was always a reason to take me to therapy, and it never felt like it was helpful. And I told myself when I was younger that I was going to be a therapist and not suck. That was I
Do you
actually
suck?
I don't know,
So you might be living up to that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying, but it's up to other people to say if I suck, I guess. But that was I actually wrote it in a journal when I was something like 12. That
okay. So this is like a long time vision.
Yep.
Okay.
And so going to a lot of therapists when I was younger, I needed the help, but there were a lot of missing parts in terms of giving me what I needed for various reasons. And so that's kind of what drove me in the dark sense of it, was my pain wasn't dealt with properly. And so I don't want to have other people have to go through that. So I'm going to commit my life to, helping those people. So that's kind of the motivation from the darkness. I would say, though, on the light side of things, I went to therapy when I was 19 voluntarily, and it was a short amount of time, but that therapy relationship absolutely created a new timeline for me. I can still consciously think of things that I do today that are linked to conversations I had with this therapist. And so, being in that therapeutic relationship and him really believing in me and genuinely caring for me, made me say to him, by the way, I think I'm going to be a therapist one day. And he was like, "Oh, you'll be excellent." And it meant the world to me. So, it was kind of a path I was always going to go down, but finding it from the light was something that you needed to be a part of it, and then refining it over years, and hopefully still refining it, is something that is part of the whole journey of it.
It's interesting that you say that. I'm a practicum student right now. I just started seeing clients, and for years I've been obsessing around the finer points of details on theory and stuff like that. And so many of the stories in therapy that you hear about are about that deep, meaningful relationship.
Yeah.
Not necessarily he had some technical detail that he imparted on me, but the authentic, genuine relationship that you have. I think that's really neat. And it's really, as I start to get into this field and start to see people, that kind of mindset starts to come to life to me.
Yeah. That's something which is a foundational piece to all of my work. And I think in today's world, I believe very strongly that in today's world, it's gotten co-opted by people who want to use that for marketing purposes, as being, I'm authentic and I care about you, and person-centered and all that kind of stuff. And, being authentic and caring about somebody is not easy. And it's literally a difficult task every single time you sit down with a person. You can't have it automatically happen. You have to understand where you're up to and where your blocks are and what this person is bringing up in you today, and how you're working through it, and am I caring about this person because it's giving me a sense of purpose, or am I caring about this person because I'm feeling into their world, right? So I'm a big Carl Rogers and Irving Yalom guy, And, those guys are the guys who, taught us about the importance and the steps, so to speak, of building a therapeutic relationship, which is authentic. So I know it changed my life, and it's a core piece of my work, but I think sometimes it's misused.
I love Yalom. I just finished Gift of Therapy, which
Yes.
was a brilliant, beautiful book. Absolutely loved it. And it sounds like you're saying that there's people who are kind of treating it almost like you might see it from like BetterHelp or something, like this vending machine of authenticity on demand.
Yes. Yes. It's very complicated to authentically care about somebody and challenge them at the same time. Right. And that's where I think a lot of it is lost with, let's say BetterHelp and those kind of corporate machines with their advertising of how much their therapists care, and individuals who are just saying, I'm authentic and I care about you and I care about you. It's like what happens in a moment where the client is acting out something which is problematic in their life and they're taking it out on the therapist. Like, how does the therapist be authentic and care about the client then? Right? Because sometimes the most caring thing you could do to somebody is be direct with them in a respectful way. And if you're pissed off at your client, which I have been and all of us have been, if you think you've never been pissed off at one of your clients, then you got a lot of work to do on yourself, because everybody is pissed off at their client at some point. Are you able to say to them, hey, I want to tell you how your behavior is affecting me, right? Are you able to say it to them directly and with respect? Or do you bottle it up and say how much you care about them until one day you kind of either lose it on a client, or the work is just kind of nothing? It's just kind of like you're just like, patting them on the back for an hour, and it doesn't challenge them.
Yeah, one of the things that I respect so much about Yalom, I think I want to say the book was Mama and the Meaning of Life, maybe. Yeah. But he's talking just raw and honest about how he's feeling. Like at one point he's like, I was disgusted by this client. It's like, are you allowed to say that? Well, it's like those feelings come up. You can pretend like they're not there, but you have to do something. You have to process that, You can't just like ignore it.
Absolutely. And a lot of the people who are misguided or haven't really discovered their deeper self yet as a therapist think that they don't have those parts, like that. They care about their clients and they love all of them and all of that stuff. And you need to be able to say, this is what I think I'm going through right now. I think that's very important to do in a safe space. And I have friends that I will call and I will say, I said this to my client today. Am I out of my damn mind? And they will, sometimes they'll say yes, and I might argue with them, and then they're like, "Why are you arguing with me? I thought you wanted my opinion, right?" So then I'm defensive about something, right? Being disgusted by a client is important information, but it also, even if you don't use it as clinical information for the session, like you need to work through that, because where do you think those feelings are going? Like you're supposed to caretake somebody that you are also disgusted by, and you're just gonna keep the disgusted energy there without ever addressing it or figuring it out or, dealing with that. So, I think like a big challenge for therapists in general is having a place where they could say straight out, like, this is what I feel towards my client. And it usually, in my opinion, can't be in the work environment. It can't be in the place where you work. Because how are you can't say that to somebody who's, in the administration of somewhere that you work. Like, I'm disgusted by this client, or I have sexual feelings towards this client, but it needs to be said. It needs to be explored. Yeah.
Wow. So what did you do your undergrad in?
So I actually did my undergrad in what's called Talmudic law, which is, it's the tractate, the Jewish tractate. And so a lot of that is, legal debate, Socratic debating. And so I did that, my undergrad in, Talmudic law. And then I went to Long Island University for social work.
Wow, interesting. It's like quick rabbit trail. I had a Jewish friend, and he just like randomly said, "Do you know why there's so many Jewish lawyers?"
Yeah.
Like, that's a weird question. I was like, "No, I don't." He goes, "Have you ever read the Torah?" I was like, "Yeah, it's the first 5 books of our Bible." He was like, "It's just a bunch of laws." He's like, "Have you ever read the Talmud?" I was like, "No, I've heard of it though." He goes, "It's just a bunch of rabbis arguing about the law." So if you're Jewish, by the time you get to law school, you have a lot of experience on law and arguing about law.
No, it's absolutely true. It's
Yeah.
absolutely true. We have the tractate that, like in the Orthodox schools, we start learning it fifth, sixth grade, and one of the beautiful things about it is that we learn through debate, Socratic questioning and debate, and it's a big belief that we have, which is that you get clarity through analysis, but like through picking something apart, like reverse
Mm.
engineering it, or like looking at it from all different angles. And so, and really, the tractate is a lot of like just legal situations. You had a an ox that gored my whatever, that ate my plants, right? So who's responsible to pay for it, and
Yeah.
how much are you liable for? And it depends on the history of the ox. Has it done this before? Who had a fence? Did you not have a fence up? Well, then I guess, right, might be on you. If
You
it
know,
grew into his property, but it's
yeah.
ruining my property, right? So,
Wow. Yeah, that's
yeah.
that's very a lot of legal legal stuff.
Uh-huh.
We're gonna
Yeah.
probably get into some social justice stuff in a minute, but it's interesting because like this is like the Holy Scriptures, and you were encouraged to argue about it and wrestle with it. Whereas kind of the Holy Scriptures of social justice, you cannot disagree in any way. Like you're not supposed to wrestle with it.
Yes, and I think that that's been a very difficult thing, for a lot of people. But I know for myself that, or maybe I don't know, a few years ago, I kind of figured out how to keep quiet at the right time. But when we were raised in this culture where if something seems untrue or off, you ask a question, right? And people get very upset about that. People get upset about it if they're not from my culture because they don't understand where it's coming from. And that's something that I've learned from my own experience very early on in my career. And that I also encourage people to be aware of, is that the rest of the world doesn't say, when you say nutrition facts, what does that mean? Is that a fact? Right? Like the rest of the world doesn't operate like that. But over the last, 5, 7 years or so, it was increasingly discouraged to challenge things and ask questions, and it's been very difficult for all of us thinkers.
Interesting. So when did you do your social work grad program?
2011 to 2013.
Okay, and what did you see there? Was it? I mean, I'm assuming it was a very different than your undergrad. What did it look like for you?
Yeah. It's really interesting. I was one of the younger people in the program because I was just pretty sure about my track that I wanted to go on. So I got there pretty young. So I did have a fire in my belly that sometimes wasn't always helpful. I learned a lot during my internships about, um, like letting go of what I think is right.
Mm.
Which I always tell my interns that the thing you learn in your internship is probably more about yourself than anything, because that's the thing I learned. The most important thing I learned during my internships was you gotta let go. There's a million ways to do things. You're not always right, and and if you start a battle, it better be worth it. So
Mm.
um I learned a lot about myself, and I'll say that the classes is so different than where we're up to now, not just in terms of like where politics have gone and all that. I think the conversations were really about like normalizing mental health struggles, and helping people be access emotions, and how males aren't really encouraged to have emotions. And it's gone the other way. It's gone so far the other way that we have to be like, yeah, be a man, right? We have to be like, you don't have to cry in order to have your emotions,
Mm.
right? So I think back to some conversations we had when I was in the classroom, and I'm like, wow, that was so on the other end of things, where now we're in my opinion, we've gone too far with trying to like force people to have emotional experiences, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of interesting that like the big swings, like when I was a kid, is boys don't cry,
Right.
and now we're like, have you heard of Marcus Aurelius, where like you can control your emotions, and it's such like a big thing. So there's just like this vast, variety there. Did you notice like a big social justice influence in your grad program?
So not really. I went to a graduate program which was actually it was in Long Island University, but it was for Orthodox Jews. So it was a program that catered to the specific calendar, the Jewish calendar being a challenge with the holidays and lining it up with the secular calendar. It really was convenient. It worked out for me to be in that environment. So already it was, less on the social justice side of things. Because kind of like that was the group that they were teaching to, and we had also a lot of Orthodox professors as well. But there were times where it would come up, and like I was saying before, with like Socratic learning and the tractate and Talmud, like people would get all fired up and they would argue back, and we didn't only have Orthodox professors, and some of those professors were really upset, and it was not easy. It was not easy to navigate. So like I think a lot of us were kind of like, this is not the truth, in regards to a lot of things. But there was a certain amount of, I will admit for myself, there was a certain amount of arrogance that we came in with, that like we already know the truth, so don't try to tell us what the truth is, when the truth could be somewhere in the middle.
What were some issues at that time that were creating that emotional turmoil where there was pushback or whatnot?
I think a lot of our discussion, I think this is interesting. I think a lot of our discussions, which ended up being controversial, were about including religion in, clinical work. Where a lot of social work conversations would be like, you leave it out, like you don't mix the two of them. And then there were a lot of people who were like in the classes that were like, but what about like if there's a religious component to this person's problem? And then sometimes people taking it too far, where they'd be like, well, what if I'm a religious social worker? Like, should I like not practice as a religious person in the room? Let's say I have somebody who's breaking one of the laws in the Torah. Should I not say anything? And that was a struggle for a lot of people, because the truth is that you shouldn't, because that's not your role. And that would be, I would say that's true according to the Jewish religion, is that you're not stepping into that role as a rabbi. You're stepping in as a mental health professional, and you need to be a different role in this person's life. So I think that was a lot of the discussion. And then sometimes it would go into specifics where, like, what if a client is, doing something that's against the Torah, and then, let's say related to the social justice world, how do you treat it? Do you treat it? Are you allowed to refer it out? It was definitely different in terms of like the axioms of social work, but it was kind of, I feel like it was the roots of where it's gone over the last 10 years or so.
Interesting. Okay. So where have you seen it like evolve since? What was it, 2011 you got licensed?
No, I graduated in 2013.
2013. So
Yeah.
so you get licensed, and you've kind of grown in the field as this social justice mindset has grown. What have you seen like in the field around you?
Well, okay. So it's very interesting because this is not really my personality, but for, I don't know, 5 years or so, I just kind of camped out in my private practice. And I blocked out the rest of the world. I wasn't on social media until like 3 years ago. And I really blocked out the rest of the world, and I just treated the people that came into my office. I live in Boca. I live in East Boca, which is like not even like the main parts of Boca, where there's a lot of even like Orthodox community. Like it's very small. And because I did that, it didn't feel like it was influencing me that much. I worked in treatment centers and things like that, and it was getting hard when we had clients who were actively psychotic, who thought they were best friends with Bruce Springsteen, but also were gender fluid. And it was kind of like, well, which ones, why do we pick, right? And that was tough. That was a place where I felt like, well, I needed to get out, and I did. And once I got out and I was in my private practice, I was like, I'm just going to do therapy. And and understand each individual patient as they come in, right? Just like Irving Yalom says in The Gift of Therapy, you have to make a therapy, a treatment for each person, right? You have to learn that person. And so um, I was kind of like at a distance from it for a long time. And then, COVID happened. And when COVID happened, you couldn't get away from it. And I do know that I clammed up for a while in terms of saying what I really thought because I was scared. And then at a certain point, I decided that I don't want to be somebody in history who, looking back, hurt people because he was too scared to say something. So I was working with a specific client, and I said to myself, I'm going to say what I believe this client needs to hear. And if I lose my license, I'll become a life coach.
That's very relatable to me because it's like, I was telling somebody the other day, it's like there's so many different movies. And I think, John Wick is one example. It's like, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to fight. And then they kill his dog. And it's like, okay, I'm going to pop off.
Right.
It's like, I think we all have some, villain origin story or something where it's like, you pushed me too far. I was going to keep my mouth shut and my head down. And, you crossed this line and now I'm coming for you kind of mentality.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, that was actually a growth moment for me because I really saw that, when you're really actually helping somebody, not that you should be putting your career at risk. You have to be smart, because I had done that in the past where I stood up for something. Either I stood up for it at the wrong time or I stood up for it in the wrong way, but it impacted me negatively. When you're really actually doing what's right, you're willing to risk, your professional standing. I wanted to, I believed that this stuff was going to end some way or one way or another. And it's still not over, but the extreme control social justice type of energy was going to end one way or another. And when I mean one way or another, was that either there was going to be a shift in the culture or there was going to be a war. And I kind of like thought of myself like 80 years from now or whatever. I don't know how old I'll be. I thought of myself as like an 80-year-old man and like reflecting on this time, like maybe I live in a different country because America became this war-torn nightmare. Right. And we're talking about the old days and thinking about how I worked with some people that had serious issues, but the issues were being lauded as courageous. And how I didn't say anything. And I, at times, maybe even said, yeah, this is courageous. You're being your true self. Like I was like, I'm not willing to do that. I'll lose my license. Come get me.
Yeah. It's, did you remember, like, you talked about one client in particular, were there any issues where you thought like, I can't stay silent on this anymore?
So I have learned from my mistakes that if I feel like I can't stay silent on this anymore, I need to do some work first. Right. So like, nobody has this down perfectly. I certainly don't. No one does. But processing your emotions before doing something bold. Right. And so sometimes I've said to clients, I have a lot to say on this, but my stuff is all mixed into this right now. And I need some time to sift through it so that I'm not taking my stuff and putting it on you. Right. And I say that very clearly so they know that I'm not avoiding it because, they did something wrong or because I'm uncomfortable with who they are, what they're bringing forward. I'm telling them that I will come back to this. I need to make sure that I'm here as a helper for you and not you, helping me go, I don't know, maybe even deeper into my own stuff. So processing, like taking time and processing before doing something bold is essential. It's essential. And sometimes we don't get the chance to do it because it happens in the moment in a session. But even then, sometimes I've said, I'm going to tell you what I think, but I want to go really slow here because I'm unprocessed in this and I'm not sure, what's my stuff and what's your stuff. And let's take it an inch at a time so that I'm not jumping the gun on anything or doing something extreme. So, there were moments where I was like I got to say something, but I don't love those moments as, you know, like, John Wick, like,
Yeah.
that's moments where it all, because then it goes extreme a lot of times.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm going to
Yeah.
say this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a very thoughtful approach. I definitely appreciate that. Do you find that a lot of your clients bring politics into therapy?
So no, it's interesting. They know me. I think that's part of it, is they know me, and I will tell them. I say this all the time. I say this to everybody. I say, I don't really think politics adds that much to our lives. Conversations about culture and philosophy and sociology, like, sure, those are great. But like when we're just kind of exchanging, like, yeah, you see what he did there, and then you see what she said there, and we're just kind of doing that back and forth. I don't really think that adds too much to our lives. And a lot of times it takes from our lives because we end up like in these useless arguments. And so they know me that I will I'm not afraid to talk politics, but my main goal in talking politics is to find the humor. And everybody should be made fun of in politics. And so, like, I grew up watching Saturday Night Live and being like, this is the greatest thing that ever happened to anyone anywhere. And, over the last bunch of years, I've tried to watch Saturday Night Live because I really, really want it to be good. And sometimes they drop something where I'm like, yes, you guys are awesome. You're back. But then they're not. But then they are. But the tragedy of that for me was that we weren't allowed to make fun of everybody. Right. And like, I voted for Trump, and I'm very happy with that decision. And at the same time, if you can't admit that Trump is a cartoon character, you're just not being honest with yourself. Right. Like, from a comedy standpoint, like, he is a gold mine of comedy. Right.
Yeah.
And like, I was a little bit nervous when Ron DeSantis was picking up steam, because I'm like, he's not that funny.
Did you hear the Shane Gillis where he's talking about, I can't communicate with my liberal friends. It's like nothing he does is funny. It's like, dude, he suggested we nuke a hurricane. Like, you can laugh at that.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my God. There's so many things that even a few weeks ago, I mean, it was a tragedy, but when he was like, why am I going to go to the water? What am I going to do? Look in the water? I'm not going to go swimming. Like, there's so much that he does. And like it was part of the movement, the aggressive social justice movement, is nothing is funny. Everything is off limits. Like, you can't make jokes about things because it's too serious. And I tell this to my clients all the time, like, 98% of life is available to be joked about. Maybe you have to pick the right time, and you have to pick the right way to do it. And, don't joke to somebody who's not ready to be joked about it. But there's very rarely a time that you must be 1000% serious, like you are, performing an appendectomy on somebody. Right. So like, I have a client where it became a phrase that we use: how could you play harmonica at a time like this? Right. And so like, there's very few times, especially in our world, where like it would be so wildly inappropriate to pick up a harmonica and just blow into it a few times. Right. So with politics, like, most of the time they would bring up politics. And if they did bring up politics, I would either kind of just let them, I'm thinking specifically in group, but even in individually, like, we could talk about it. I'm like, yeah, we can talk about it. But for the most part, they know that, like, I don't believe that that is a central piece of life. And my belief is that that was a very valuable thing. That is a very valuable thing to bring to my clients in today's world, because therapy and entertainment and everything has been co-opted by this belief that you must turn it political, because this is your opportunity to take a stand or this or that. And like, you take a stand, and then sometimes don't take a stand. Like, sometimes just play basketball or something, or, I'll go bowling. Like, so I think, I've delivered that to them. The other piece of it with politics is that, sometimes I've had conversations with them where I, like, earlier on in all of this, where I revealed to them intentionally that I voted for Trump, where I said to them, I want to tell you something. And these are a couple of clients I'm thinking of that had been dysregulated at points. and ruined relationships because of political discussions and viewpoints and people who voted for Trump. And I did it at a time where I believed that we had enough of a strong relationship where this could be a therapeutic moment for them, where I could say, I want to tell you this, and I want you to know that I have the same amount of respect for you as I always did. And I want to know how you feel about it. And is this something that, we could continue to build this deep relationship that we've been building for several years? Because I think it is. Because I think at the end of the day, we trust each other. And you're finding out this piece of information now.
This would be like a progressive client?
Yeah.
Wow. How does that go over when you do that?
So I that's what I'm saying is like I assessed the relationship before I did it, right? I assessed, like, is this person in a better place to handle this? Because I was recalling times where he wasn't in a place to handle it at all with other people. And so I kind of had a hunch that this would be a good opportunity because he can handle it today. And I did it, and we had a long discussion about it. And it ended up being like a really great accelerator of our relational work, because he realized that, listen, this guy, my therapist who cares about me and is here every single week with me, voted for Trump. And I didn't know that for, several years.
You'd think you could spot the horns or something,
Right. I don't know. Yeah. Like you would, right. If you're evil, you're evil.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think he's evil. And I'm like, and I love doing this to people because it confuses the hell out of them, is when they start talking politics, I agree with them on something on the other side. I'll be like, oh yeah, that Trump, that was a dumb thing he did. And I don't say it was a dumb thing he did, but Biden, blah, 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 blah. I'll just be like, yeah, oh yeah, that was ridiculous. I don't know what the hell, that was stupid. Right. And people are kind of like, what? So when he says, when this client would say things like, well, I don't like when Trump did that, I'm like, I hear that. Yeah, no, it's not cool. It's not so nice. Right.
Yeah. So from what I see in my grad program and from what I'm observing in the field is there's like a general idea, like being conservative or Republican is kind of suspect. And I've heard a number of therapists say you could not be a Republican therapist. There's something like dispositionally, like you couldn't do it. And the idea of like a Trump supporter specifically is there's this mindset that, well, there's kind of an ick factor there. Like there's something icky about you. Like there's a disgust response. Like there's something so morally depraved about you as a Trump voter that it would be unthinkable that you could be a therapist. Have you gotten any kind of pushback in the field by being public about your politics?
So that's what I'm saying, is like, I'm not really that public about it. Right. Like I'm not really that public about it. People start talking to me about politics and I'm like, I think of where my mind goes is, what's the funniest thing that happened this week? Like that's literally where my mind goes. And I steer the conversation there. Unfortunately, I learned this lesson growing up. My father and his father had a bad relationship, and they would fight about politics every single time we got together, to the point where I can recall, me and my two brothers in the backseat of our car driving to my grandparents' house and us being like, no politics tonight. No politics, please. No politics. Right. And we were young. Like we shouldn't have been having to say that, or shouldn't have been saying that. But the point was that they were fighting about politics, but they were really fighting about their relationship. They were going, you're not hearing me. And then the other one's going, no, you're not hearing me. And I as a kid, I wanted to be like, maybe neither of you guys are hearing each other. Like maybe neither of you are listening to each other.
The young therapist.
Yes. I always joke that, they taught me to be a therapist before they taught me how to tie my shoes. But, some people don't like that joke because it's too real for them.
Yeah.
But I saw what that was doing. It was so silly and so useless, and everybody gets so bent out of shape. And it would be like, great Hanukkah party, guys. Like, I'm glad that we settled the debate if George Bush is a good president or not. Like, it was useless. So in general, I will steer away from political conversations that, just happen socially. I think attaching your identity to a political affiliation is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing to do, because if you think about it, like, politicians are salesmen. and they're selling something, and they're twisting language, and they're involved with all these things behind the scenes that you don't know about. And like, do you want that to be your identity? Like, I feel like if you're in politics, okay, but like, if I'm having a conversation with somebody, I want to know what they're passionate about. I want to know what they enjoy. I want to know if we have similar interests. I want to know if we should spend time together playing tennis. You know what I mean? Like, you voted for this person and that's who you are. I just don't see it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I'm wondering, you said at one point they thought they were arguing about politics, but they were arguing really about their relationship. And I'm wondering, you see like this kind of political obsession with the social justice movement take over so much of therapy. And I'm wondering if there's that kind of, I don't know if it's projection or avoidance, what's going on there. Like, it seems like there's some underlying thing there other than just like, I don't want protectionist trade tariffs. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I think for a lot of people as individuals, I think that there is somewhat of a like a displacement of their relational issues. Because like the whole idea of I can't talk to this person anymore because they voted for someone or something like that, right? Like you're making a choice. That's a choice that you're making in your life. Now, you might feel like you have no choice in that matter, like, because they did something that's so bad that, you have to make that choice. But you are essentially choosing to give up on a relationship. And if you're choosing to give up on a relationship that doesn't have any actual like issues other than, disagreement politically, then I think that you probably would have given up on that relationship with some other vice at some point, because you probably have some relational issues that you don't know how to handle. So your brain is giving you a good reason why, and then, a way out where you don't have to deal with it anymore. So I think for a lot of people, I can't talk to my adult son because he voted for Trump. How much did you talk to your adult son before that? How was your relationship when he was 6 years old? Right? Like, those are the questions that I ask. And then I ask, how is your relationship with other people in your life? How's your relationship even within your political circles? And so I think on an individual level, I think a lot of people who already had struggles are, kind of like attached to a movement where you could control relationships through it and have a justification for it.
That's so fascinating. And what came to my mind is that's true, but also the kind of the flip side of that is true, where I think there's relationships where there's not a whole lot of content, but if you can say like, either say like Donald Trump is doing something terrible and you agree on it, or like, wokeness is terrible and you agree on it, you might not have any kind of depth in your relationship, but it's like, okay, we can kind of have this superficial bond on this thing that we agree on.
Right. Yeah. And it's hard to know, because you could say that about many things that we agree on, is that like it could be a superficial way of bonding. Right. I think it's limited because it's kind of like talking shit about somebody else. Like, you feel like you're really close to the other person, but then like you walk away and you're like, we don't know each other close, It's like the lowest form of connection is talking shit about other people. So, politics could be like that too. We could connect really quickly because we're talking, we agree about wokeness and this and that. But like, at the end of the day, relationships need to be built. And if you feel like you're really close to somebody really, really quickly, you probably are not close to them at all. And that's not just true about politics. That's true about a lot of things. They need to be built. You need to spend time together. You need to have experiences together. And you need to get past the agreeable stage and get to the I have a different opinion than you stage, right? That's in the 7 Levels of Intimacy. I forgot who wrote that book. But the book 7 Levels of Intimacy, level 3, I believe, is opinions. You start sharing opinions with each other, right? So like, the first 2 levels are pleasantries. And the 3rd level is where I say, you know what, I don't really like that movie. It reminds me of that Ian Peele sketch where one guy says he didn't like the Christopher Nolan Batmans, and everyone's like, what? Right? And he's like, oh, it's just an opinion, right? You can't get through that stage. You're not going to have very deep relationships.
Yeah.
So politics, I think, is just like, it's a low level connector. or divide. Yeah.
I feel like it should be that, but there's so much attached to it to where it's like, if you don't share my politics, one, you're too ignorant to know the correct answer, but two, you're morally depraved because, you kind of set up this dichotomy of, the other side is like essentially Darth Vader, and so if you would side with Darth Vader or the Nazis or the communists or what have you, like you're just the worst person ever. And like, I couldn't have that person around my kids, you couldn't be a therapist. You have this level of instantly, I don't know why you voted for Trump, but I can tell, like, he must be like stupid. He must be morally depraved. Like that instantly kind of comes in your head when you find out somebody's politics because you attach all these other things to it.
Well, I'll tell you this. This is where I voted for Trump, but I'm somewhat apolitical, right? Because I don't trust politicians. I never, ever trust politicians. And I think we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. And I think that it's a distraction, right? Fine. Growing up, my parents were very conservative politically, and we were nonstop listening to Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Michael Savage. I used to come as a teenager. I used to come into the kitchen and I'd be like, "Can we eat supper without Michael Savage tonight? Is that okay?" And all these guys were yelling for years. Mark Levin, like they're all yelling for years, right? And for years they were saying, "This is step one of them taking over the democracy. Then this is step two, and then before you know it." And I remember my parents were saying, we're worried that Obama is going to enact martial law, and he's going to become King Obama. And I think that was something Michael Savage was saying. And after Trump won the first time, and he was in office for a little while, I trolled him a little bit. I was like, "How's King Obama doing? Where is he? What happened to King Obama?" Like, and you just forgot about that. You just forgot. Like, you forgot that you were panicking, and this was step one in a three-step process, right? So I'm saying all this because both ends of the spectrum can be psychotic, right? And they can say, "I'm not psychotic because look how psychotic they are." It's a different type of psychosis, right? So, Trump derangement syndrome, maybe has, you go on TikTok and you yell in your car, right? And that is, to me, that's very sad, right? But on the other extreme, where my whole life, Republicans and conservatives were victims who were anxious. They were saying, "Look what the establishment is doing to us. And if they do this, what if they do this? And what if they do this?" Right? And they kept on doing it over and over and over again. They kept saying it over and over again for my entire life. And when I became an adult, I was like, you know what? Neither of these are a way to live. Like, you make your decision about what you think is going to be good. If it's some reason it's time to fight and defend yourself, get up and defend yourself. You want to say you want to be prepared for that? Prepare, but live your life, for God's sake, And so I have a hard time really with anybody who's extreme. I voted for Trump, but when I start talking to somebody and they're like, "Rah, rah, MAGA, MAGA, MAGA," I'm like, "Do you play tennis?"
You talked about the Obama martial law thing. Here in Texas, we had this conspiracy theory. I don't know if you heard of Jade Helm.
No.
So I don't know how widespread this was, but I had a number of friends who believed in this. They believed that Obama was going to invade Texas and take over Walmarts and set up concentration camps in these Walmarts, right? Mm-hmm. And, the day Obama left office, I messaged my friends, like, where is he? When's he coming?
Right.
It was the same thing. I wish there were a way we could put less salience on politics, because there are so many, family, faith, activities. There's so many other areas of life that are so much more meaningful on a deep level, but it's kind of colonized our minds in that sense.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to roll that back. Like, it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's where I think it's important to make fun of your own side, so to speak, right? Like, make fun of yourself a little bit. Like, if you can't make fun of yourself, then you take it too seriously, and then it can be a focus of your life, like one of the main focuses of your life, right? But if you're like, what I think is ridiculous, how like Republicans always say this about Democrats, but they also got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just joke around about it. Like it's not going to kill you to joke around about it. And I also think that there's a certain maturing that happens where, like, you start to realize that your life is much larger than politics. and that like you decide what you want to do in your life. Like I always say this to people. I'm like, whenever you're like really over invested in politics, you're looking around at the world and you're seeing problems, and then it gets filtered back through that lens, right? So I used to say, I was saying this to people when they were upset at Biden. I was like, you can be upset at Biden, but if you go to the gas station and you see $3.91 for a gallon of gas, and you're just angry at Biden, like you're wasting your time and energy because you were getting that gas anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So like, don't sit there and be like, fuck Joe Biden, Joe Biden, Joe Biden, blah, blah. Like, put the gas in your car, be like, oh, this is annoying. I wish it was some different, but it's not. Now I'm going to go do, now I'm going to go live my life. So it's like you like, I think there's a maturing that kind of happens where you start to realize like, I'm in control of my own world. I'm in control of my own decisions. There's a certain intersection where I have to vote on something or I share my opinion about something. But at the end of the day, like my daily experience is not really changing unless I allow it to change me and the way that I think, right? So taking a break from the news, I've done that many times. I encourage my clients to do that. One of my clients who was really, really upset about Trump the first time, I talked to him about, if you didn't see the news for the next 4 years, you would either be not okay because he destroyed everything and killed everyone, or you would be okay
And
because he
happier.
didn't do that. Right. So I'm like, if I think if he was starting to take over things and like really destroy, whatever, like you would hear about it and it wouldn't come from checking the news and being like, when he said this, he might have meant that. And this is just another example of how he's a psychopath. Like, I'm like,
I
go
feel
live
like,
your life, man. Go
yeah,
dancing or, like
I
go.
feel like easing off the news is one of the biggest life hacks for mental health. It's
Yes.
just,
Yes.
I heard somebody say sports the other day too. I'm not as big into sports, but like, if it's a game that I really care about, I'll be so pissed off if, a call goes the wrong way, and it's like has zero effect on my life, and I kind of realized that it's like I'm putting too much energy here, but it's the same with the news. It's like, something that is marginally affect my life or not at all. It's a huge, just, taking over my thought life.
Right. And I think about it sometimes relating it to living passionately, because this is something that I focus on a lot in my therapy is, from a humanistic standpoint, like humanistic existential, we're searching for a purpose and we have it born within us that we're always striving, right? We're an organism that's in motion, that's growing, it's reaching, we're a plant that's reaching for the sunlight, right? And everybody's destination is different. And so, when you have zero things that you're passionate about in your life, you kind of like go towards something which is stimulating, it's instantly gratifying, and maybe you have a sense of passion when you're like being political, right? But if you don't have anywhere else where you go with your energy, your human energy, so then thinking about stopping to read the news, for example, sounds like a bad idea, because you're like, then what am I going to do? What am I going to do with my time, right? But I keep referencing tennis because I picked it up during COVID, and it is like one of the loves of my life. And I play 4 or 5 times a week, and I will drop everything I'm doing and all the news I'm reading if I have a great match to play. Like if someone's like, hey, you want to play right now? I'll be like, let's go. Right. And so meaning like it's so much better. It's so much better to live like that part of my life than it is to sit in this like arguing whatever. But if you don't have that other part developed, so then you don't want to let go of the news, and you don't want to let go of porn. And that's where, that's my specialty, is working with porn addiction. And
Really? Okay.
yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. A lot of the work that I do outside of the behavioral structures that are going to keep them from, acting out on a regular basis is what sparks you, and how do we get more of that in your life? Because if we can build that up, whatever that is, to the point where when you think about watching porn for the next hour, but then you're like, but I could also go cycling for the next hour, I think I'll hold off on the porn. But without the cycling as an example, like you just go watch porn over and over and over again, and then you have no life. Yeah,
That's so fascinating. I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, and that's my personal life. I've also spent a lot of time working in addiction treatment centers, but I've since started leading addiction recovery group at my church, and a lot of the guys are there for pornography. And I really had no clue how big of a deal it was. It was somewhat of a deal in my life that I had to wrestle with, but I didn't realize like how I mean, this is a massive issue. Marriages are breaking up over it. Guys are never even starting to date because of it.
Yes.
Like I had no clue how big this deal was.
Yeah.
Like, what are you seeing?
Oh, it's massive. You're 100% right. Families are getting destroyed by this. Men and women too. It's always important to mention that women struggle with porn addiction. Maybe, it's not as common, but it's those, they need help because there's not a lot of really good resources for women who are struggling with porn addiction. But it's rampant and it's such a strange piece of our culture is that we don't talk about it. And I think that we don't talk about it from both ends of the spectrum, from extreme right and extreme left, is that I think that on the extreme left, it's about sexual freedom and sexual expression. And I disagree with that so much. I could go on for days about how much I disagree with that. On the extreme right, or whatever you want to call it, like conservative or, a lot of times there's a religious taboo around it.
Around talking about it?
Yeah. I mean, that it's something that you shouldn't really be doing. And like, we're not going to get up and give a sermon about pornography. Like we're going to, if you have an issue, come talk to the rabbi or the pastor or whatever. But like in general, it's not something that we really want to publicize and talk about. And so I think that on both of those extremes, they don't want to talk about it as an issue. And then I think there's a lot of people in the middle that don't want to talk about it, even though they're leaders of groups, because they watch it and they don't want to bring it up. They don't want to deal with it, or they don't want to challenge it for themselves, right? They don't want to go further than they've gone, meaning they watch a lot of porn, right? So like, I think that there's so many layers on top of why we don't talk about it. And it's a legitimate epidemic. It is sucking the life out of people and destroying families. I can't tell you how many wives I've had sitting on this couch who are bawling their eyes out because they're like, he lied to me again. And he hasn't been present in 15 years of marriage, and I don't even know who he is. And the guy is there like a total drunkard who is like completely unaware of himself, going like, listen, I wouldn't watch porn if like there was dinner when I got home or some crazy logic. And it's like, that's addict brain, man. I feel bad for those people, and I want to help them.
Yeah. I'm going to push something at you, see how you respond. I've seen a lot of younger men who are addicted to watching porn, and they'll finish watching porn and immediately start watching the Whatever podcast or Fresh and Fit, and it's like you have all these sexualized ideas of women, and then you start channeling that into this hatred of women. Yeah. I don't know. I can't explain that connection, but I'm seeing it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that the connection is very strong, because when you view women as objects of pleasure, but that pleasure is harming you, you attack it afterwards. You're upset at it afterwards. You're like, why'd you do this to me? Right. So there's a lot of like hatred for women that comes from porn, not just from the content, yes, but just the idea of like these beings hold the key to my happiness, and then it destroys me, and then I'm depressed with something. Yeah.
I think there's like a level of confusion as well, because there's like on the sexual or romantic or whatever emotional, there's such a strong pull, a magnetic attraction there. And then you realize these type of women that look like Instagram models or whatever are never going to go for me. And so I've got to do something with that attraction that I have in my head. And I spin this into this hatred. And I'm looking at porn every day to relieve that like libidinal desire. but then I flip onto these red pill channels and get back into the hatred, and it's just like this cognitive dissonance that's just spinning out of control.
Yeah, well, the common thread there is objectification of women.
Yeah.
Right. And when I did my training for sex addiction treatment, and with Patrick Carnes in his institute, and the first thing they teach you is that sex addiction is an intimacy disorder, and what that means is the person has a disordered way of attaching to other people and can't feel close without having sex. And so intimacy disorder gets reinforced by seeing women in porn content and using it to their own pleasure without having any sort of exchange, right? Without having any sort of give, right? It's only just take. And it reinforces over time that women are objects. So then, you could love an object and hate an object. Like some days I love my car, and some days I'm like, this thing is a piece of crap, I should never bought it, right? But like it's not offensive because it's not a person, right? And it's not damaging my ability to relate to other people, right?
Yeah.
So like I think like the theme of both of those is objectification. It just shows up differently depending on the day or depending on the hour for those people. But they have they're not really able to have a relationship with other people where it's, there's a constant give and take, and there's experiences where you're just spending time together, and you're not trying to manufacture it into the way you want it to be exactly the way you can do with porn.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talked about, I guess, finding like another activity, tennis or whatever. What kind of big picture, what's the solution to this porn thing in society going forward?
So there are a lot of pieces to it, right? Because, let's say on the legislative level, there's got to be things that are done. We just had Pornhub banned in the state of Florida, which
Texas too.
Yeah, right. That's right. Which is a great thing. It's a great thing. And a lot of people were like, well, they'll just open another site. And you have to think about it as a progression, because I remember when Florida and 17 other states over a period of a few years, like 2015, 16, declared porn a public health crisis. And it officially has been declared by many states as a public health crisis. Now, in order to get a state to declare something as a public health crisis, you need to have the data to back that up. You need to have research. And so once you have that research, then you put it up to be considered in the House of Representatives. And then once it gets passed, so then it puts together a precedent for dealing with it, and maybe put some funding towards dealing with it, right? So this has been a long time coming. So the banning a site is a big deal in the larger picture of things, right? But then, not on, let's say, on an individual level, right? So individuals are, I've changed my view on this over time. We need to block it out of our devices. We do filters and such, if it's a problem. But I think at the end of the day, the more we can foster the human spirit, the more it trumps porn. It just it beats porn. I'll tell you what I mean by that. I teach improv at a high school, a boys' high school. And these boys are boys that didn't fit into the mainstream high schools, and they made this alternative high school for them. And while I'm teaching improv, very rarely are they on their phones. They're almost never on their phones. They are sometimes, and whatever, but they like almost forget about their phones for a little while, right? And improv is the kind of thing where you get way more present the more you do it. You're connecting to other people, and then all of a sudden the other thing starts to kind of fade, right? And they could all be watching porn instead of coming to my class. But because we're connecting to each other and we're using our human energy and spirit, I think it's like, I'll watch porn later. And then if you have enough reasons to say I'll watch porn later, then you have a reason to live your life in a way that's not controlled by porn. And so I think about this from parents teaching their kids to live their lives, right? Like going out with them, like go rollerblading, whatever the hell it is you do, like do that with them. When you're at night and you come home and you want to veg on the couch, do that sometimes. But like they should see you being like, I'm going out tonight because me and my friends go bowling, or me and my friends we take a cooking class, or I don't know. Like, if they see you living your life and you live your life with them, then they will watch porn, and then they will say, okay, that was pleasurable. I'm not gonna miss out on all the other things we do as humans.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it almost seems like an existentialist, kind of like, I think Yalom might describe it that way. Like,
Yeah.
you have meaning and purpose in life, and the addiction just loses salience, loses importance, right? You have
Yeah.
some higher meaning, and that could be like a God type meaning, or it could be playing tennis with a buddy,
Yes.
or going bowling with friends. Like, do you have some kind of superior meaning? And I think, like, not just the porn, but even speaking more broadly, we have a crisis of meaning and purpose in this country.
Yes, we do.
It is. I mean, you look at drug addiction, pornography addiction, obsession with politics. Like, all this stuff is due to a lack of core meaning and purpose.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people are scared to search for it, because what you end up finding a lot of times is something which is not mainstream. Meaning you end up going into a small area of the world and making yourself a community. We use that word a lot, but it's, in my opinion, it's an overcompensation of our society, because we don't have communities anymore. So then everything is a community, right?
Yeah.
Like the clicky pen community, because we all like clicky pens. Like, it's not a community. It's a community when you guys get together and you share values and you share experiences. When you start searching for your meaning, it's going to look different than that guy's and that guy's and that guy's, and you're going to have to do some things which maybe don't look as whatever as cool, or as socially like appropriate, or I don't know. And people are scared of taking that risk, of stepping outside the mold, right? Like, I'm deep in the improv community. And the improv community, in my opinion, is a wonderful place. I don't think that 90% of my friends could handle the ridiculousness that exists in that community. And it took me a while to really, really embrace it. But I'm like, this is my home. So, this is where I go, and I feel fulfilled and I feel connected. Like, you have to be willing to take those chances and explore. And a lot of people are not willing to do that.
Wow. Yeah. I have two questions left for you. One is, how do you fix or improve, or like, what's the future direction for the therapy profession in your eyes?
I'm not 100% sure. I'm hesitating because I want to say something that's more realistic than idealistic. But I'll tell you my thought. My thought is that, the more we can look at the next generation of therapists and encourage them to read and learn old texts, right? And teach them that every period of time has a culture, has a feeling, and there's some parts of it that are deep in our humanity, and some parts of it that are just going to fade away. And if you are building your entire, structure of working based on the time that we're in, then it will fade away and it won't work. At a certain point, it's not going to be cool to say to your clients, it's okay to not be okay. Like, it's not going to work, right? And clients are going to push back on it. But if you think about humanity as having, time and geography and culture and religion and all different ways that we've lived, there are certain things which are true about humanity. What are those truths, right? And then if you can build on those truths, so then you will have something which is much deeper, and it will endure past whatever the current moment is, right? So I think about my social work classes, and I think that there's a handful of students in the room that will hear me when I say this, and they will study theory, and they will go back and look at what's been done before and what's been tried before. And then, there will be some that don't, and that's okay. But I think it's our responsibility to give people the idea that this is something which is really, really deep and that needs to be continuously studied. And if you do that, then you'll be great at this, and you'll help so many people. And so I don't know how we fix the field or how it changes, but I know that that's something that I try to impart onto students as they're entering the field. And I try to remind myself, like, if I'm not reading, I'm like, okay, I got to pick up a new book. I got to pick up a new angle. I got to go to the library and my university library and pull a book off the shelf from 1944 psychoanalysis journal and see, like, what were they saying at the time, right? So I don't know that fixes the field, but that's kind of what I think will make at least the really good ones.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer. And my final question, just in terms of public discourse at large, what is something that we're not talking about that we should be talking about?
Well, I think porn. I think we got to be talking about porn. How we talk about it and when we talk about it definitely matters, because we don't need to be talking about it all day. And we don't need to be talking about it with all ages and all populations at all times, but we need to have the courage to talk about it directly, not beat around the bush, not make it out to be like it's something that some people have. And, if you have that problem, let's talk on the side. If we are in a room full of men, we can assume that whatever high percentage of them have had negative consequences from porn, and they would benefit from a conversation that included honesty about porn. So, I mean, that's the one that comes to mind. But I will say this, though, is that I'm more inclined to answer the question by saying that we need to stop talking about serious things all the time, because that seems like that's all we're doing. And that's part of the reason why I do comedy in my therapy. And that's part of the reason why I take serious conversations and I turn them into joking conversations, because I think we're always trying to find this deep topic to talk about. And sometimes we have to sit together and just be like, ha, 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 life is funny. Don't you think this is a good cigar? Yes, I do. Like, it doesn't have to be this crazy exchange of ideas all the time. And I think that we can calm down a little bit on all sides of it.
I like that. It's almost like giving people permission to relax.
Yes.
Because it almost feels like you have a moral duty to be uptight a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I like
that's
that.
Why I teach improv. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I do that, because I'm like, when was the last time you laughed as an adult? When was the last time you laughed? Last Saturday night, I was doing improv with some friends, and I was laughing so hard that I was in so much pain. I had to leave the room, and I was like, I want to stop laughing. But that was after 2 hours of belly laughing. Like, which adult does that? Right? And people think it's just like, okay, you become an adult and you don't do that kind of stuff anymore. No, you choose not to do that kind of stuff anymore. And that's why I'm like, there's very serious conversations to have, but man, we need to play a board game.
Wow. Yeah, I like that. I'm up for your vision.
All right.
Awesome. Well, Judah, thank you so much for joining me. If you'll hang around for just a second while we finish the upload, loved having you. We'll have to have you back again sometime.
Thanks for having me.